I'm Bob Burrill, and I'm recording this on the evening of October 8th, 2021, which is going into Columbus Day weekend, or as it's now known in many parts, Indigenous Peoples Day weekend. And I have a little story to share with you that, in a sense, fits with Indigenous Peoples Day. And this goes back to my student teaching days, which was many, many years ago. 1976, spring of 1976. I student taught at a middle school. I won't tell you the real name, I'll call it Christopher Middle School. I worked with two cooperating teachers, which is unusual. One I'll call Jim, who taught seventh graders, who was a very likable, personable, energetic guy. And one was a guy I'll call Luigi, who taught eighth graders. Probably was in his late 30s at the time and quite subdued compared to Jim. And I had a terrible student teaching experience. I decided after that I never wanted to be a public school teacher. A lot of you don't even know I have two college degrees. Yes, one is from Central Bible College, but before that is this one from Stonehill College. But anyway, it was a spring day in 1976, and I walked into Luigi's classroom, and he had a table set up at the front of the room, a table and chair, and he had a number of arrowheads on the table. In those days, we called them Indian arrowheads. I don't think that'd be politically correct today. And he said, I'm going to teach a lesson on arrowheads. And this was early in the day, probably first period. And he had about 10 arrowheads. And it took him 40 minutes to cover all 10 of these arrowheads. He talked about what they were made of and what colors they were and what state the arrowhead came from, what tribe had made the arrowhead, how old the arrowhead was, all sorts of things like that. Went through a whole lesson. The class filed out. The next period class filed in, and Luigi said to me, well, Mr. Burrill, you're going to teach the lesson to this class. I just about passed out. I was retaining maybe 20% of what he had said. And there I was. Have you ever seen Don Knotts play Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show? And especially when he tries to act really confident and authoritarian and he's anything but, and he makes a fool of himself? Well, I hate to say it, but that's what it was like. And I taught the lesson that Luigi took 40 minutes to teach. I taught the whole thing in less than 15 minutes. And it was terrible. And I made an absolute fool of myself. And kids were laughing and kids were fooling around. And then I had to somehow fill the rest of the time. And I did fill the rest of the time. I don't know how I did it. And the class filed out. And the next class filed in. And I was terrified. And I was confused. And I felt horrible. And I stood up and I said to Luigi, I don't feel so well. And I walked out of the room. Now, I told you Jim was the other cooperating teacher. Luigi had his own classroom. Jim did not. But Jim had a little office on the first floor of that building. In fact, he had said to me, Bob, anytime you want to have a free period or something and go in and use my office, you certainly can. And at times I did that. I went down to that little office and I sat there and I was numb. And Jim came in, I guess he had a free period the next period. And he said, Bob, what's wrong? You seem so upset. And I told him exactly what had happened. I don't know how I didn't break down crying. I came within a 16th of an inch of breaking down crying, and I was a mess. And Jim said to me, look, Bob, he said, you didn't learn about Indian arrowheads in college. And I don't know what Luigi was thinking to just throw that lesson on you with no preparation and then tell you you could teach it. He said, that's pretty crazy. And he said, if I were you, I would, after school, go up and talk to Luigi and just tell him that that was unreasonable and you can't do that. And he really did help me a lot, and I felt a lot better. And I used to spend part of the day in those days in Luigi's classes and part of the day in Jim's classes. I guess I spent quite a bit of the rest of the day in Jim's classes, although I did go up to Luigi at the end of the day. And I did tell him that it didn't go over well at all. He thought there was no reason why I couldn't have taught that lesson. Just did not go over. And something made me think of that this week. I hadn't thought of that in a long time, but a situation came up and I vividly thought about that. But there's so many takeaways from that. I mean, for one thing, I think about the teacher that Jim was and the person that Jim was, and the teacher that Luigi was and the person that Luigi was. And they were like night and day. And as far as you think about mentoring someone, you think about teaching someone, you think about encouraging or discouraging someone, there's so much that comes out of that experience. And, I might have ended up never teaching, never doing any public speaking. I mean, I never taught public school after that, but I have done, of course, in ministry. How many classes have I taught? I don't know, probably hundreds. How many sermons have I given? Definitely hundreds. How much public speaking have I done? A lot. I could have walked out of there and said, I'll never do public speaking again. But I didn't do that. And for some reason, it came to me to tell that story this weekend. Maybe somebody needed to hear it. Maybe somebody has had a really bad experience that has kind of shaken you. And I had another one like that several years ago. A very close friend of mine passed away, and I was grieving that, and I was not in a good place. And I was part of a group that was holding a special service on an evening, and I had agreed to be the facilitator for the service. I'm usually very good at something like that. Honestly, I did a terrible job, because I was so upset about my friend's death. And I thought about that later, and I said, boy, I mean, maybe I don't have it anymore, but I'm glad I didn't stick with that. That was an anomaly. It wasn't the norm. So several things are coming to me. If you have a bad experience, don't let it stop there. Get up, move forward, and do what the Lord leads you to do. And don't be defined by that bad experience. And if you have an opportunity to teach or mentor, or as we say as Christians, disciple someone, don't give them some impossible thing to do and then act all put out because they can't or won't do it. But show them what to do and show them how to do it and encourage them. And if somebody needs a word of encouragement, I didn't get a word of encouragement that day from Luigi. I did from Jim. I'm not sure exactly why I'm sharing this. And actually today, I mean, the last thing I felt like doing back then was laughing about this. That's the last thing I felt like doing. But today, I can actually look back upon that experience. I have a number of takeaways from it, and I can even kind of laugh about it. So I want to encourage you, if anything about this story resonated with you, be encouraged and take that as an encouragement from the Lord. God bless you. Thank you.